So it's really about giving, telling the past behind the present. That's what I was in the main interested about. Now, in order to understand this past behind the present, I think we have to go back to the early Qing. And the reason for that, I think, is very simple, because it was, at that time, then China was already a center of global trade. It was probably the most advanced empire in the world. So I think that's a very good starting point. And it's also a necessary starting point, because it's kind of the ideal time that is still in the back of Chinese politicians, Chinese political leaders, actually also, I think, to a large part of the Chinese population. So that is the reference point. This is the golden age. That was the ideal. And after that, that's often experienced as a humiliation, a downfall, a decline that China suffered. So much about today's China is about restoring the earlier grandness, so to speak, of the Qing Empire. My name is Klaus Mühlhahn, and I'm the author of Making China Modern: From the Great Qing to Xi Jinping. I try to shift the main focus away from what many historians were, I would even say obsessed with, for a long time. And that is culture, so mentality, or Confucianism, or the idea that China is so beholden to its cultural traditions. So that's why I shifted the focus of my book away from that areas towards institutions, towards the environment. The economy plays a very big role, borders. So you can say these are practical matters of statecraft, practical matters of governing. And the whole idea is to argue, to say China isn't that much different. In China, people have always been interested in similar things that we have been interested. In China, they go after these problems in a different fashion. They have their own unique institutions, their own traditions, but these institutions are not necessarily primarily a cultural thing, right? They are influenced by values, certainly, but it's still also about the challenges that they have to deal with. My favorite example for this issue of the continuity of institutions, also the power of institutions, is the examination system. And I spent actually a lot of time thinking about this, and I think it's a relatively clear departure from how other books portray the examination system, because it's so fascinating that when Europeans looked at China in the 19th century and tried to find causes for China's plight or problems, they looked at the examination system and said, well, that's a bad system because people are examined on their knowledge of classical writings. And that sort of becomes the embodiment that China is unable to be modern, because it refuses to include modern subjects like mathematics, geography. It clings to the classical writings, and therefore it's backward. And that has always sort of bothered me, because I went in Germany to a school where I learned Latin and ancient Greece. And Europeans have been trained for centuries in classical writings. A whole generations, 10 years even, until you get a degree and graduate from high school. And it was never seen as a hindrance for science and progress in Europe. So I look at that as an institution that deals with one big challenge: how to train and select talent. And they do it using classical writings. And I think that has been a remarkable institution. I think it's overlooked the logistics as behind it. That means the rules behind it, they were fantastic. There was much emphasis played that it's fair, that it's not prone to, it's not susceptible to corruption, to outside influence. There was numerous checks and balances, and it was a huge system. There were millions of documents corrected in one examination cycle. And much effort was made so that it's objective, that it's a real, good, reliable selection of talent. So I tell this as a story of an institution that's remarkably successful. And then in the 20th century, partly because of Western criticism, but partly also because this examination system, of course, is elite formation, and the elites were attacked, so the examination system gets abolished. But it gets only abolished for about a little bit over 10 years. And then immediately after the revolution, 1911, the examination system comes back. And then, of course, we know it comes back in the 30s, it comes back in the 50s, and it comes back in 78. So that's very powerful. example, and I think a very good example for the continuity of institutions, although, of course, this institution has changed, because today's Chinese students are tested on math, on many things, but still, by the way, also on political doctrine, right? So that's still in the examinations.